Babe, I can't wait to tell you the good news. Congrats, you're going to be a daddy. Deborah typed into her phone, smiling to herself. She sat in the plush leather chair in her lover's apartment, the aroma of Joseph's cooking drifting from the kitchen. A glass of red wine rested in her hand, half empty from the evening's relaxation. The soft hum of the city outside felt distant, as though nothing could touch the bubble she and Joseph had built. She sent the message to Daniel, her husband of 6 years, who was at home, blissfully unaware of the betrayal unfolding. Deborah felt a flicker of guilt, but it passed quickly, buried under the thrill of her secret life with Joseph. He was charming, exciting, everything Daniel wasn't. Daniel was the steady, dependable type, good, solid, but predictable. Her affair with Joseph had reignited something within her, a fire she thought had long burned out in her marriage. "What's got you smiling?" Joseph's voice pulled her from her thoughts. She glanced up, watching him move around the kitchen with the ease of someone completely at home in his own skin. He flashed her a wink, tossing vegetables into a sizzling pan. His grin was infectious, and she found herself smiling back. "Just sent Daniel a text," she replied, shrugging lightly as if it were no big deal. But inside, the rush of deception gave her a strange mix of excitement and guilt. Joseph chuckled, unfazed. "Poor guy. Probably thinks you're out shopping with your girlfriends." His tone was light, almost mocking, and Deborah didn't correct him. Why would she? He didn't understand the complexity of her situation, the tangled web she'd woven between duty and desire. Her phone buzzed. Deborah glanced at it casually, expecting a sweet, simple response from Daniel. Instead, her heart nearly stopped. "Didn't your lover already hear it?" the message read. "Isn't he a good daddy for your kids?" Deborah froze. The room seemed to spin. Her fingers went numb, and the wine glass slipped from her hand, shattering as it hit the floor. She jumped at the sound, her pulse racing. Daniel knew. He knew everything. Her heart pounded in her chest, her stomach turning to lead. "No, no, no," she muttered under her breath, staring at the phone. Her mind was a whirl of panic and confusion. How could he know? She had been so careful, so discreet. Her throat tightened, and she could barely breathe. She felt trapped, like the walls of Joseph's apartment were closing in on her. "Deborah?" Joseph's voice cut through the haze, concerned. He moved quickly from the kitchen to her side. "What happened? You look like you've seen a ghost." Deborah blinked, trying to gather her thoughts, but her mouth moved faster than her brain. "I have to go. Something's wrong," she stammered, pushing herself to her feet. Her hands shook as she grabbed her purse, fumbling to find her car keys. "Whoa, whoa," Joseph said, stepping in front of her, his brow furrowed in confusion. "What's going on? Talk to me." She couldn't meet his eyes. "Daniel, he knows. He knows everything," she whispered, her voice trembling. Her mind raced with worst-case scenarios. How much did Daniel know? How long had he known? Joseph's face hardened, the casual amusement replaced with unease. "How? What did he say?" She held up her phone, and Joseph read the message, his jaw tightening. "Shit," he muttered under his breath. "What are you going to do?" Deborah shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't know. I need to go home. I need to talk to him. I need to fix this." She shoved past Joseph, her panic growing with every second. The weight of the truth was crushing her, suffocating her in a way she hadn't expected. "Wait, Deborah, slow down." Joseph called after her as she rushed toward the door. But she couldn't stay. She couldn't face him right now. There were no answers here, only chaos. "I'll call you," she mumbled, barely audible, as she hurried out of the apartment, her heart pounding. Her hands fumbled with the car keys as she reached the parking lot. The evening's calm had been shattered like the glass on Joseph's floor, and now she was on the edge of losing everything. The drive home felt endless, though it was only a few miles. Deborah's knuckles were white from gripping the steering wheel too tightly. Her hands shook, but she forced herself to keep driving. The quiet hum of the engine did little to calm the storm of thoughts in her head. Daniel knew there was no escaping that now. She replayed the message over and over in her mind, the words cutting deeper each time. "Didn't your lover already hear it? Isn't he a good daddy for your kids?" Her stomach churned, a mixture of guilt, fear, and anger twisting inside her. She could barely focus on the road, her heart pounding with dread. Maybe I can explain, she muttered to herself, trying to cling to any hope. Maybe there's still a chance to fix this. The moment she turned onto their street, an unsettling feeling crept over her. The house stood in the distance, dark and still. No lights, no sign of life. Daniel always left the porch light on when she was out late. Tonight it was off. The house looked abandoned, almost foreign. Deborah's hands trembled as she pulled into the driveway. The silence felt suffocating, like the entire world had come to a standstill. She sat in the car for a moment, staring at the darkened windows, her mind racing with what awaited her inside. "Please let him be home," she whispered, a plea to the universe that everything wasn't as bad as it seemed. Taking a deep breath, she opened the car door and stepped into the cool night air. The crunch of gravel under her shoes was deafening in the stillness. She rushed to the front door, fumbling with her keys, her heart thudding in her chest. "Daniel," she called out, pushing the door open. The house was silent. The air felt heavy as she stepped inside, flicking the light switch in the hallway. Nothing happened. The power was off. Her pulse quickened as she fumbled for her phone's flashlight. The narrow beam of light swept through the hallway, casting long shadows on the walls. "Daniel," she called again, her voice more urgent, cracking with fear. But only her echo answered back. She moved through the living room, her eyes darting around. The place was eerily still, too still. The furniture sat in its usual places, but something was wrong. The air felt stale, cold, as if the life had been drained from the space. The silence was unbearable. "Daniel, where are you?" Her voice grew more frantic, but she didn't stop. She hurried through the kitchen, the bathroom, the guest room, room after room, each one more empty than the last. Her footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors, amplifying the hollow feeling in her chest. Finally, she reached the bedroom. Her heart was pounding in her ears now, the flashlight beam shaking as she reached for the door. The door was slightly ajar, as if waiting for her. With a shaky hand, she pushed it open, bracing herself for what she might find. The light from her phone illuminated the space in front of her, and her breath caught in her throat. The room was stripped bare. The closet doors were wide open, revealing nothing but empty hangers. Daniel's side of the dresser was cleared out, drawers open and empty. The once cozy bed where they had spent so many nights together felt cold, lifeless, the sheets smoothed out as if untouched. Her chest tightened. "No," she whispered. Her heart raced as she stepped further into the room, the flashlight shaking in her hand. Panic surged through her veins. She moved to the bedside table, where something caught her eye. A crumpled piece of paper lay next to their wedding rings, the gleam of metal dull in the flashlight's glow. Deborah's throat tightened as she reached for the note, her fingers trembling. Unfolding the paper, her eyes scanned the messy handwriting, the words slowly sinking in like poison. "Surprise, bitch. I'm gonna be a daddy for your beautiful sister's kids. This is not the end." The note slipped from her hands and floated to the floor. Her knees buckled as the weight of the words crashed down on her. She grabbed the edge of the bed, sinking onto it as her legs gave way. Tears welled up in her eyes, blurring her vision, but she couldn't stop staring at the wedding rings, the once perfect symbol of their love, now twisted into a cruel reminder of everything she had lost. "This can't be real," she whispered to herself, shaking her head in disbelief. He wouldn't do this. He wouldn't, but deep down, she knew it was real. Daniel was gone, not just from the house, but from her life, and he had left a message as sharp as a knife to ensure she felt the full weight of her betrayal. Her mind raced as she tried to process what he had written. "Megan," she whispered, her stomach churning. Her own sister. The thought of Daniel being with Megan sent a wave of nausea crashing over her. No, it's not possible. He's lying. He has to be lying. But the empty room, the missing belongings, the cold, calculated note, all of it pointed to one inescapable truth. Daniel had known about her affair, and he hadn't just left. He had exacted his own revenge, the kind that shattered everything she thought she knew. Deborah sat on the edge of the bed, tears streaming down her face, her body numb. She had lost everything in one swift blow. Her marriage, her home, her security, it was all gone. And now, her sister was involved in the fallout of her betrayal. She couldn't stay still any longer. Deborah jumped up from the bed, pacing the room in a frantic daze. She grabbed her phone, scrolling through her contacts, desperately searching for someone to call. But who? Her friends had no idea about the affair, and if they found out, they would surely side with Daniel. Her parents? No. They would be devastated to learn their daughters were caught in such a mess. She stopped pacing and stared at her phone, breathing heavily. Joseph. She could call Joseph. He would know what to do. He had been the one she had turned to when she needed an escape, when things with Daniel became too suffocating. But now, even Joseph felt like part of the problem. This wasn't about her and Joseph anymore. It was about what she had done, the damage she had caused, and the consequences she now faced alone. She dropped her phone onto the bed, her hands shaking. "What have I done?" she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible. The reality of her actions crashed down on her like a tidal wave. There was no going back. Daniel was gone, and he had taken everything with him. Deborah sank to the floor, curling in herself as the sobs finally broke free. She was trapped in the wreckage of her own choices, with no one to blame but herself. Outside, the night was still. The house, once her sanctuary, felt like a tomb, empty, cold, and devoid of life. She was alone, and for the first time in her life, truly terrified of what came next. The night was pitch black as Deborah sped through the empty streets. Her mind was racing, a storm of thoughts and emotions she couldn't control. The only thing anchoring her was the address in her GPS, her sister Megan's house. She couldn't shake the image of Daniel's note, the cruel words that had shattered her. "Surprise, bitch! I'm gonna be a daddy for your beautiful sister's kids." It wasn't real, she kept telling herself. He can't mean it, but a nagging voice inside her told her otherwise. Daniel wasn't the type to make idle threats. If he said something, he meant it. Her fingers clenched the steering wheel so hard, her chest tight with a mix of fury and fear. How long had Daniel been planning this? How long had Megan been involved? The betrayal was suffocating. Her mind flashed back to all the moments her sister had stood by her, smiling, acting like everything was fine. It all felt like a sick joke now. As Deborah pulled into Megan's driveway, the house stood dark and silent. Her heart pounded as she stepped out of the car, her legs shaky. The air was heavy, and the silence of the night felt like it was pressing down on her. She marched up to the front door, her stomach twisted in knots. She pounded on the door, her fist trembling with adrenaline. "Megan," she yelled, her voice cracking. "Open the door!" There was no response. She pounded again, harder this time, her frustration mounting. "Daniel!" Finally, the door creaked open, and the sight that greeted her made her heart stop. Daniel stood there, shirtless, his arm casually draped over Megan's shoulder. He was calm, almost too calm, while Megan stood beside him, her face expressionless except for a slight, mocking smile. The sight of them together hit Deborah, like a punch to the gut. She staggered back, her world spinning. "Daniel!" Deborah's voice was raw with anguish, her eyes wide in disbelief. "What the hell is going on?" Daniel took a step forward, his face cold and unreadable. His eyes were no longer the soft, caring ones she had once known. They were hardened, distant, and full of something dark. "You thought you could get away with it, didn't you?" His voice was low, a dangerous whisper that sent a chill down her spine. "But I'm always 2 steps ahead, Deborah. Always." Megan stood by his side, arms crossed, watching her sister with a smirk. "You reap what you sow, sis," she said with a bitter chuckle. "You really thought you could keep your little affair with Joseph hidden? I knew all along." Deborah's knees buckled, and she gripped the doorframe for support. Her breath came in ragged gasps as the weight of her sister's words sank in. "Megan, you knew?" Her voice trembled, barely above a whisper. "How could you?" Megan cut her off with a sharp laugh. "How could I? How could you, Deborah? You've always been the perfect one, haven't you? The golden child. Well, guess what? You're not so perfect anymore." Her eyes gleamed with malice. And now, you're going to pay for it. Deborah's world tilted as the realization hit her. This wasn't just Daniel's revenge, it was Megan's too. All the small moments, the cold glances, the subtle jabs, it all made sense now. Megan had been waiting for this, biding her time, ready to strike the moment Deborah faltered. "Daniel, please." Deborah's voice broke as tears spilled down her cheeks. She reached out, her hand trembling. "We can fix this. I made a mistake. I'm sorry. I love you." Daniel's expression didn't change. He looked down at her hand like it was something dirty. "Sorry," he repeated, his tone mocking. "Sorry doesn't even scratch the surface, Deborah. You didn't just make a mistake. You destroyed us." His voice grew colder with each word. "Everything we had, you threw it away. And now I'm moving on. With Megan." Deborah shook her head, disbelief mixing with horror. "You're not serious," she whispered. "Megan? You can't be with her. This is insane." Daniel took another step forward, his voice low and calm, but filled with venom. "You think you're the only one who gets to have secrets, Deborah? Think again. You're not as clever as you think. I've known about you and Joseph for months." Deborah gasped, her mind racing. "Months? Daniel, why didn't you say anything?" Her voice was frantic, desperate to find a way out of this nightmare. Daniel chuckled darkly, shaking his head. "Because I wanted to watch you dig your own grave. Every lie, every little deceit, it only made this moment more satisfying. Watching you scramble, watching you panic, it's exactly what you deserve." He glanced back at Megan, who grinned at his words. "And now, I'm done with you. Daniel, please." Deborah's voice cracked as she stepped forward, her hands trembling as she reached for him. "I know I hurt you, but we can still fix this. We can go back to how things were, before everything got so messed up." Daniel's face twisted in disgust. "Go back? There's no going back, Deborah. Not after what you did." He looked at her like she was a stranger, someone he no longer recognized. "I gave you everything. I loved you. And this is how you repay me? With lies and betrayal?" Deborah's legs felt weak, and she sank to the ground, sobbing uncontrollably. "I'm sorry," she choked out. "Please, don't do this." Megan's laughter filled the air, sharp and cruel. "Look at you," she sneered, begging like a pathetic little girl. "You always thought you were better than me, didn't you? But now you're the one on your knees." Deborah looked up at her sister, her vision blurred by tears. "Megan, please. You're my sister. You can't do this." Megan's smirk only deepened. "Oh, I can't, and I will. You ruined your life, Deborah. I'm just helping Daniel pick up the pieces." She looked at Daniel, her expression softening. "We're going to have a great life together, aren't we?" Daniel nodded, his gaze never leaving Deborah. "We are." He crouched down in front of her, his voice a cold whisper. "You made your bed, Deborah. Now you have to lie in it. Alone." Deborah's sobs echoed in the still night as she realized the full weight of her actions. Everything she had done, every lie she had told, had led to this moment. She had lost Daniel. She had lost Megan. And now, she had lost everything that had ever mattered. Daniel stood up, taking Megan's hand in his. "Goodbye, Deborah." He didn't look back as they walked into the house together, leaving Deborah crumpled on the doorstep, alone in the darkness. The door slammed shut, and Deborah was left with nothing but her shattered world and the cold, unforgiving night. Deborah stared at her reflection in the mirror, her face hollow and gaunt from sleepless nights. It had only been weeks since Daniel's revelation, but it felt like a lifetime. Her world was collapsing around her faster than she could keep up. The mornings bled into nights, each one more unbearable than the last. She couldn't escape the suffocating weight of her shame and the searing pain of loss. The house, once filled with warmth and memories, now felt like a mausoleum. She had called Joseph 100 times, her fingers trembling as she sent frantic messages. But there had been no response, no explanation, no goodbye. He had vanished as soon as Daniel uncovered their affair, leaving her to face the wreckage alone. One evening, after another long, silent day in her empty home, she dialed Joseph again. This time, the phone didn't even ring. The automated voice message was the final blow. The number you were trying to reach is no longer in service. You coward, she whispered, throwing her phone across the room. It hit the wall and clattered to the floor. The silence that followed was deafening. There was no one left, no friends, no family, and certainly no Joseph. Her parents, who had always doted on her, had turned their backs after finding out about the affair. What were you thinking, Deborah? Her mother had hissed during their last phone call. You've ruined everything. How could you do this to Daniel? And with your sister involved? It's unforgivable. Her father had said nothing, but the silence was worse than any lecture. They hadn't returned her calls since. The last time she showed up at their house, her mother had barely opened the door, speaking through the crack. This is your mess, Deborah. Fix it yourself. And then the door had slammed shut. The isolation was suffocating. Deborah had never imagined that her life could unravel so completely, so quickly. Her friends had all distanced themselves, most of them making it clear they stood with Daniel. No one wanted to associate with the woman who had not only cheated on her husband, but had also been tangled in a sordid betrayal involving her own sister. Then there was Daniel and Megan. Every time she turned around, they were there. They had become the center of attention at family gatherings, smiling, laughing, holding hands, as if they hadn't completely obliterated her life. It was like a cruel game. They flaunted their relationship openly, making sure Deborah saw every intimate moment. The first time she saw them together in public, they were sitting in a cafe she used to frequent with Daniel. Megan was draped over him, her hand resting on his chest as they laughed about something she couldn't hear. Deborah had stood frozen outside the window, her heart pounding in her chest, her breath coming in shallow gasps. This can't be real, she muttered to herself. But it was. They were living the life that had once been hers, and now Megan was pregnant. When Deborah heard the news, it was like a dagger to the chest. Daniel had wanted children for so long, but she hadn't been ready. And now, Megan, her sister, of all people, was giving him the one thing she had denied him. It was at a family gathering that everything finally boiled over. Deborah hadn't wanted to go, but her mother had called, insisting she attend. She could barely make it through the front door before the sight of Daniel and Megan sent her spiraling into rage. Megan's hand rested on her barely there bump, and Daniel hovered protectively beside her. They were glowing, basking in the attention and admiration of the family. Deborah clenched her fists, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the eyes on her as she walked in, whispers rippling through the room. But she didn't care anymore. She had reached her breaking point. She marched straight up to Daniel, her voice shaking with fury. "You destroyed me," she screamed, her face twisted in anguish. "How could you do this to me?" The room went silent. Every eye was on them now, but Deborah didn't care. The humiliation, the whispers, it all paled in comparison to the betrayal she felt. She had to make him feel it, had to make him understand the depth of her pain. Daniel didn't flinch. He stared at her with that same cold, detached look he had worn the night everything fell apart. His lips curled into a twisted smile, and he took a slow step toward her, his voice dangerously calm. "I didn't destroy you, Deborah. You did that all by yourself." His words cut through her like a knife, each syllable heavy with disdain. "I just finished what you started." Deborah's breath caught in her throat as the room around her blurred. She couldn't look at anyone, couldn't face the looks of pity or judgment that she knew were there. Her legs felt like they might give out, but she refused to crumble in front of him. "Not again. You think this is my fault?" She spat, her voice rising. "You think what you're doing is justified? You're just as bad as I am." Daniel's smile faded, his expression hardening. "Don't kid yourself, Deborah. This was never about being better or worse. This is about consequences. You betrayed me. You betrayed everything we had." He paused, his eyes narrowing. "And now you're paying for it." Deborah's hands trembled as she clenched them into fists. She wanted to scream, to tear him apart, to make him feel even a fraction of the devastation she felt. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, all she could do was stare at him, her chest heaving, as the full weight of his words settled over her. Megan stepped forward, placing a hand on Daniel's arm. Her eyes gleamed with triumph as she looked Deborah up and down. "Face it, Deborah, she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. You lost. Deborah's vision blurred with tears, but she refused to let them fall. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break down. Not here, not now. Without another word, she turned and stormed out of the house, her heart pounding in her chest. As she slammed the door behind her, the cool night air hit her like a slap in the face. She stood there for a moment, breathing hard, her fists still clenched at her sides. The sobs that had been building in her chest finally broke free, and she sank to the ground, her body shaking with the force of her despair. She had lost everything. Her marriage, her family, her friends, it was all gone. And now, as she sat on the cold pavement outside the house that had once been her safe haven, Deborah realized she had no idea how to put her life back together. But one thing was certain, she couldn't stay here. Not anymore. She had to find a way to move on, even if it meant leaving everything behind. Through the tears, Deborah made a silent vow to herself. She would rebuild, no matter how broken she was now. She would find a way to survive. Because as much as Daniel and Megan had taken from her, they hadn't destroyed her completely. Not yet. The months following her public breakdown had been unforgiving. Deborah felt as if she were walking through a never-ending fog, her once vibrant world reduced to shades of gray. Without a job, without friends, and financially drained, she spent her days in a small, dingy apartment she could barely afford. The walls seemed to close in on her more with each passing day. The crushing loneliness weighed heavily on her chest, making it difficult to breathe. She had no one left to turn to, except Daniel. Deborah had tried calling him, sending emails, and even writing letters. Each attempt was met with cold, clinical responses, if he bothered to reply at all. There's nothing left to fix, Deborah, one email had read. Move on like I have. The words had stung, each one cutting deeper than the last. But she couldn't let go. She refused to believe that this was how her story would end, with nothing but ashes and regret. And so, on a rainy October evening, Deborah found herself standing at the front door of what used to be her home. The house loomed before her like a distant memory, glowing warmly from within. The life she once had was still there, just on the other side of that door, but it was no longer hers. Her heart pounded in her chest as she gathered the courage to knock. The rain soaked through her thin jacket, her clothes clinging to her skin, but she didn't care. She had to see him. She had to try one more time. The door opened slowly, revealing Daniel. He stood there, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the hallway light. He looked healthier, stronger than when she had last seen him. His once tired eyes now sparkled with clarity, as if the weight of their broken marriage had lifted off his shoulders. The sight of him, so steady and sure, made Deborah's knees feel weak. She swallowed the lump in her throat. Daniel, she whispered, her voice trembling with desperation. Please, can we talk? Daniel's gaze flicked over her, taking in her drenched appearance. For a moment, something like pity crossed his face, but it quickly hardened into indifference. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. There's nothing to talk about, Deborah, he said flatly. Deborah stepped forward, her feet dragging as if the ground beneath her was pulling her down. I know I've made mistakes, she pleaded, her voice cracking. But we can fix this. I'll do anything. Please, just give me a chance. She wiped at the tears mixing with the rain on her cheeks, her hands shaking. Daniel let out a sigh, his eyes narrowing slightly. A chance? You want a chance now? His voice was calm, but there was an edge of incredulity. Deborah, you had your chance. You had so many chances, and you threw them all away. For what? A fling? A secret affair that meant nothing? She flinched at his words, feeling them land like blows to her already bruised soul. It wasn't nothing, she whispered, but it wasn't worth losing you. I know that now. Her words tumbled out in a desperate rush, her mind racing for something, anything, that would make him reconsider. I made a mistake, Daniel. I wasn't thinking. I just want things to go back to how they were. Daniel's expression darkened, and he shook his head slowly. Things can never go back to how they were. His voice was cold, final. You shattered what we had, Deborah. You took everything good and pure in our marriage and destroyed it. Do you honestly believe that we could just pretend like nothing happened? Deborah's legs gave way, and she collapsed onto the porch, her knees hitting the wet concrete. She didn't care about the cold or the rain. All she could feel was the unbearable weight of her failure. She looked up at him through tear-blurred eyes, her voice a broken whisper. I'm begging you, Daniel. Please. I can't do this without you. For a moment, Daniel was silent. His face softened, but it wasn't with affection or hope. It was pity, and that realization hit Deborah harder than any of his cutting words. She wanted him to be angry, to fight with her, anything but this cold indifference. He knelt down to her level, his voice low but firm. Deborah, I loved you, more than anything, but that love isn't enough to fix this. He paused, his gaze piercing hers. You made your bed. Now, you have to lie in it. She sobbed openly now, her hands reaching out to grab the hem of his pants, clinging to him as if he were her last lifeline. I'll do anything, she whimpered. Just don't leave me like this. Please, Daniel, don't leave me alone. Daniel gently pulled his leg from her grasp and stood up, looking down at her with a mixture of sadness and resolve. You left me alone long before this, Deborah. His voice was steady, but there was a finality to it that made her heart sink even further. This is your mess to clean up, not mine. Deborah watched, helpless, as he turned and walked back inside the house. The door shut with a soft click, but to her, it sounded like a prison gate slamming shut. She was locked out of his life, out of the life they had once built together. For a long moment, she sat there in the rain, her body trembling from the cold and the sheer weight of her despair. The porch light flickered, casting a weak glow on her soaked frame. Deborah stared at the door, willing it to open again, for Daniel to come back and tell her he had changed his mind. But the door remained closed, and she was left alone in the darkness. Slowly, she rose to her feet, her limbs heavy and aching. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, though it did little to stem the flood of tears still falling. With nowhere else to go, she turned and began the long walk back to her car. The rain continued to pour down, drenching her completely, but she didn't care. All she could think about was the echo of Daniel's words ringing in her ears. You made your bed. As she reached her car and fumbled with the keys, a sob tore through her chest, racking her entire body. She slumped into the driver's seat, her head resting against the steering wheel as the tears came harder, faster. Her world was crumbling, and no matter how hard she tried, there was nothing she could do to stop it. Now lie in it. The rain pounded against the windshield, drowning out her sobs as she finally let go, her body shaking with the weight of everything she had lost. The years that followed the collapse of his first marriage were transformative for Daniel. The pain that had once been his constant companion eventually dulled, replaced by a sense of peace. He had rebuilt his life from the ground up, learning to trust again, both in himself and in others. The woman who had entered his life after Deborah was a balm to his wounded heart. Sophia was kind, patient, and understanding in ways that reminded him what true love could feel like. They had met by chance at a charity event he had reluctantly attended. What had begun as casual conversation turned into laughter, shared experiences, and eventually love. Daniel had been hesitant at first, scarred by the betrayal that still echoed in the recesses of his mind. But Sophia had never pushed. She understood his hesitations, and it was that quiet understanding that made Daniel fall for her. They married 2 years after meeting, and soon after, Sophia gave birth to their first child, a little girl named Lily. Parenthood was something Daniel had once feared he would never experience, but now, with Sophia by his side, it was his greatest joy. He found himself thriving in this new chapter, his days filled with the warmth of family and the laughter of his daughter. But even as Daniel found happiness, he couldn't help but occasionally think of Deborah. She had become a ghost in his mind, a figure from a past life that he tried not to dwell on. He knew her affair with Joseph had imploded not long after their separation. Joseph had disappeared, leaving Deborah with nothing. The family she had once counted on for support now shunned her, disgusted by the choices she had made. Her friends had distanced themselves too, unwilling to be associated with the fallout of her betrayal. Deborah had been left to fend for herself, and from what Daniel heard, life had been unkind to her. It was on an ordinary Sunday afternoon, several years later, that their paths crossed again. Daniel was walking through the park with Sophia and Lily. The sun shone brightly overhead, the breeze carrying the scent of freshly cut grass. Lily was giggling as she toddled ahead of them, chasing after a butterfly with her little hands. Daniel smiled as he watched her, feeling content in a way he had never imagined possible after all the chaos of the past. "She's growing up so fast," Sophia said beside him, her voice soft and full of love. "Soon, we won't be able to keep up with her." Daniel chuckled, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "Don't remind me. I'm still trying to get used to the idea that she can walk on her own." As they walked along the path, the park was busy with families enjoying the day. Children played on the swings and slides, their laughter filling the air. Couples strolled hand in hand, enjoying the sunshine. It was a perfect day. But then Daniel saw her. Deborah. She was sitting alone on a bench near the edge of the park, her posture slumped, her face drawn. Her once vibrant beauty had faded, replaced by a worn, tired expression. Her clothes were plain, and her hair, once styled with care, now hung limply around her face. She looked like a shadow of the woman Daniel had once known, the vibrant, confident Deborah who had captivated him all those years ago. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and in that instant, Daniel saw everything he needed to know. Deborah's life had unraveled completely. There was no need for words. Her expression told the entire story. Regret, sorrow, and loneliness clung to her like a shroud, and Daniel felt a pang of something he hadn't expected, pity. He had once loved her with everything he had. He had shared his dreams, his heart, and his life with her. But that love had been shattered, broken beyond repair. And now, seeing her like this, he realized how far she had fallen from the pedestal she had once stood on in his mind. Deborah held his gaze for a moment longer, her eyes pleading silently for something, for recognition, for forgiveness, or maybe just for a fleeting connection to the past. But Daniel couldn't give her any of that. He had moved on. He had built a life without her, a better life, and there was no room for her in it anymore. He turned away from her, his heart lighter than it had been in years. The weight of what had once been between them had finally lifted. There was no more anger, no more resentment, only the quiet acceptance that their lives had diverged completely. Sophia, sensing the shift in his mood, looked up at him with concern. "Are you okay?" she asked gently, her hand slipping into his. Daniel smiled softly at her, pulling her closer. "Yeah," he said, his voice calm and assured. "I'm better than okay." They continued walking, Lily's laughter guiding them down the path. Daniel glanced back one last time at the bench where Deborah still sat. She hadn't moved, her gaze fixed on the ground now, as if she couldn't bear to look at him any longer. A part of him felt sorry for her, but it was a distant, detached kind of sympathy. Deborah had made her choices, and she was living with the consequences. That was her burden to bear, not his. As they left the park, Daniel's thoughts turned back to his family, to the life he had built. He was happy, truly happy for the first time in years. The darkness that had once surrounded him had lifted, replaced by the light of a new love, a new life, and a future that no longer held any shadows from his past. Meanwhile, Deborah sat on that bench, staring at the ground as memories of what she had lost played over and over in her mind. The affair with Joseph, the deceit, the lies, it had all led her here, to this place of isolation and regret. She had no one to blame but herself, and she knew that now. But knowing didn't make it any easier to live with. In the end, Daniel had moved on, leaving Deborah behind in the wreckage of the life she had destroyed. He had found peace, love, and happiness, while Deborah was left with nothing but memories and the bitter taste of regret. As Daniel and his family disappeared from view, Deborah wiped a tear from her cheek, the weight of her choices pressing down on her with unbearable force. The life she had once dreamed of was gone, and there was no going back. For Daniel, it was the beginning of a new chapter. For Deborah, it was the end of the road.